Okay, so let's get started with solving problems. And in this case, we would like to calculate the area and perimeter of a rectangle after the user enters the values for its sides. So I wrote the comment here as to what the problem that we're trying to solve looks like. And you have to understand that a problem is like a system. So it has typically inputs and outputs. For you to get the output, you need to understand the domain of the problem, which means you definitely need to know what the inputs are and how to process them. Okay? So that means you're going to do this in various steps. First, define what the inputs are, process them, and then get an output. So I'm going to break it down into logical sections as to what you would do in a typical program like this, and from the top down sequentially. So we first need to handle the inputs for a problem. And then we need to process to obtain an output, or a relevant output to be clear. And then we will display or store the output, so we could display to the screen or store it in a file. So these are your typical, at its basic core, what a program is supposed to do. You're going to supply it with inputs, you will process, and then you will output. Okay? In its simplest form. All right, so remember, I'm asking, we want this problem to be interactive, which means the user will enter the values of the rectangle. Now, in a rectangle, as long as we know the width and the length, we can actually process these two together to figure out the area and the perimeter. Okay, so for this to happen, you need to know the algorithm for solving for the area. And here, you need to know what inputs you should have. In our case, we need the width and the length. Here, once we have these, then we know the area is going to be length times width. And we also know that the perimeter will be equal to length plus width, and then we're going to multiply all of this by 2. So we could put a 2 here and multiply all of that here. Just remove this. So notice the parentheses here. That means that's the order of operations. Start with this, add these two together, multiply them by 2 afterwards, and you've got your perimeter. So this here sets the tone as to what we're going to be doing exactly to solve for this. And then print to console the area and perimeter. So in other words, we're setting here what are the steps that we need to do to solve a problem like this. So let's go ahead and start with this one. We know we need width and length. And guess what? The variables you're going to need, usually name them according to what you really want. So make them meaningful. Create a variable called width and create a variable called length. All right. So maybe something like this. Length equals, and we're going to ask the user, all right, to input the value for the length. And remember that the input function returns a string. So you need to, again, typecast to a float. So we need a float, and then input, enter, the length. Okay? Now we could test this quickly right here. So you can do these while you're writing your program and test each statement as you go. So as you can see here, it's asking me to enter the length. So 5.6, that's fine. And the program ended. There's nothing else we've done with this program. Otherwise, all we have here are comments. And we set up and wrote these comments again to guide us as to what steps we need to do to write this program. Next, we're going to do the same thing with width. And then we're going to typecast to a float. And then input, it's a function that allows us to interact with the console. Enter the width. Okay? So now I can test this. It will ask me to enter the length, 2, and the width is 3.1, for example. Again, we didn't process, we didn't do anything. But as far as my inputs, handling of the inputs, that section is done. We're good with that. We know that we have the width and length stored in memory. Can we prove that? Yeah, you could actually go over here, print, you entered for length, or you could say something like this, you entered, and let me just give a space here, and then comma, length, comma, for length. Actually, we don't need a space there because we realize that it will set up the space for us. And then something like this. And width for width. So this, just to confirm, that's what we entered. So try to consolidate all your outputs right here, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and run this again. So 3.3 and 2.1, and there you have it. You entered 3.3 for length and 2.1 for width. Excellent. So now let's go ahead and process. So we want to find what the area is, right? So guess what? Area, you can create the variable and do this. So I can remove these comments. These comments that are here are already set up properly for a Python process. What I'm going to do is just copy them, paste them here, and just remove the asterisk right here, right? So what does that allows me to do? So now I have a variable called area that is the result of multiplying length and width, and I have a variable called perimeter that is the results of adding length and width together and then multiplying them by 2. So that means now I can go ahead and print same way I did here, and we could say area equals, we could do something like this, comma, area, and then and perimeter equals, and then we could do the same thing here, comma, perimeter. And notice here, as I'm trying to type here, it already knows, these are some of the options you have. Obviously, we're going to pick the first one, which is the dereferencing of the variable perimeter, right? So we want the actual value for perimeter. Now let's see how this works. So we're going to go ahead and enter 4.5 for length and 2.3 for width. And there you have it. So it will multiply these two together to get the area, and the perimeter will be the addition of these two times 2. Okay, so we're going to come back, and for the next lesson, we're going to use a module, okay, to do a little more sophisticated calculations. For example, if I want to use pi, or if I want to do square root, or if I want to square something, right? So to do these, we're going to need a module called math. So that's for our next lesson. I will see you then.